There's really nothing stopping them from continuing to grow militarily. They can use that nuclear arsenal as a really big bargaining chip to get them a position on the world stage with other nuclear powers, which has always been the goal.
You're going to pick up.
You pick up.
Oh, me pick up. Okay.
Hello, I'm Kunal Sehgal. Welcome to Meanwhile in Asia, where we take a closer look at some of the biggest stories and questions that are shaping the region.
And I'm Ivan Watson. And Kunal, today we're going to be talking about North Korea. It suddenly popped up in the headlines again, largely because of some statements that were made by President Trump.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, just a few days ago from the time we're taping, President Trump has said that he wants to scale back military exercises between U.S. and South Korea, just as
close allies.
Close allies, just as when we think North Korea is getting stronger and stronger because of the war in Ukraine.
Right. So that brings us to the question for today's episode. Is North Korea more dangerous than ever right now? And to, I think, explore that, we're going to go where North Korean weapons are being felt on the battlefield, and that is in Ukraine, in that horrific war that's been underway for some 4.5 years. So to help us unpack this, we're going to turn to one of my favorite people, Victoria Butinka, who is our experienced producer in Kyiv. It's great to see you, Victoria. And first of all, I do want to ask, the situation on the ground in the Ukrainian capital is very ugly and dangerous these days. How are you? How is your family, your teenage son, under these kind of daily, nightly bombardments that the city's enduring?
It's nice to see you, and thank you for inviting me. Indeed, we're in a situation where we had 4 air raid sirens overnight only, and they are now ballistic air raid sirens and jet drones, which means that they're only seconds to get to the shelter, and there were victims of people who were trying to get there. And quite often now their explosions come along with the air raid siren, which of course makes it scary for everyone, and especially for the parents such as me. A new reality for everyone here, and people are trying to adjust, but still it's sleepless nights most of the time.
Victoria, we've seen reports of more and more North Korean weapons that are being used now in recent attacks. I just wanted to ask, what kind of weapons are being used, and how is that changing the realities of the battlefield?
North Korea has been using Ukraine as a test ground for these missiles because the first time they were used around 2 years ago, they were quite imprecise. Now they've gotten much better. North Korea had its personnel on the ground. It had the engineers to improve that. So this North Korea is learning from this war, and its weapons are improving here. But we can definitely say that if it wasn't for the North Korean help, Russia would have had shortage of both ballistic missiles, artillery rounds, and of course of the personnel.
Victoria, I mean, recently President Zelensky has said that the North Korean troops being part of this war is not just a danger to Ukraine, but also to Asia as well and U.S.'s allies. I mean, what are North Korean troops gaining from this war that they can't probably do from military exercises? What is it that they're gaining from this actual war on the ground?
We're looking at an army that had tens of thousands of soldiers being trained on the actual ground in a war that's going on. And I think no other army in the world, can now basically boast this. This is the experience they're going to get and learn from it, equipment-wide, people-wide. And we know from covering those North Korean soldiers that when they came there, their diaries where they've never seen a drone. They said it was something flying to them from the sky, and now they are operating them already.
Could there be an expansion of the North Korean participation in this conflict on behalf of Russia, on the Russian side?
What I believe the strategy behind using those forces is to replace the Russian soldiers that had to fight and protect the Russian border so they can go to fight in Ukraine, while on the Russian territory, you would have the North Korean troops protecting the Russian land. And the numbers we have heard from President Zelensky are anywhere from 30,000 up to 50,000. I believe this is the ask that Russia had to North Korea, and unclear how many people North Korea would actually give, or would that be the number that would be coming on a rotation basis. But if you look at the scale of the whole armies, this is how many people it takes Russia a month to actually mobilize. This is what this number from the North Korea would actually help.
It's an important source of manpower for Russia, which is this much larger foe, but is still facing manpower challenges, given just the slaughter that's been underway for now 4.5 years on the battlefield. And I might add that we have Ukrainian intelligence saying that North Korea may have sent more than 100 additional ballistic missiles recently to Russia, as well as some personnel to be firing some of these ballistic missiles at Ukraine. And it dramatically, as you pointed out, complicates what is already basically an existential battle for Ukraine. Victoria, thank you so much for speaking with us, and I wish you and your family and our other colleagues there safety in these very trying times.
Thank you for paying attention to this war and to what is happening to us here. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria.
Really good to speak with Victoria there, who's basically making the case that North Korea has prolonged the war for Ukraine right now by sending troops and selling large amounts of weapons to the Russians.
Yeah, that's right. And I think just to dig deeper into how that has benefited North Korea, we're joined by CNN senior international correspondent Will Ripley, who is also our North Korea resident expert. Will, thank you so much for joining.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm an expert. It's impossible to really be an expert about North Korea because there's just so much that's kept hidden from the world.
Come on, how many times have you been to Pyongyang?
19.
There you go.
That must be a record.
Right.
We're trying to answer the question, is North Korea more dangerous than ever before? And that's because for years, North Korea has been isolated from the world and the international community. And, Kim Jong-un, the leader, has faced sanctions after sanctions, but things are changing because of the war in Ukraine now. They have more money because Moscow is transferring more money to Pyongyang, transfer of technology. Even diplomatically now, we've seen Kim Jong-un with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin as well. So with all of that, and especially now when Donald Trump just days ago put out a statement saying that, well, we're going to scale back these military exercises with South Korea because, well, quote unquote, North Korea has been unthreatening and respectful of his administration. I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, there were 2 missile launches just in recent days in the lead up to these military drills that President Trump's now ordering to be substantially
North Korean
reduced.
missile launches.
North Korean missile launches. They didn't talk about it on their state media, though, which is interesting because usually when there's a missile launch, they'll show the missile on state television, and that hasn't happened. So they're definitely being more low-key in terms of the signaling on television anyway. But yet the military buildup, of course, continues. They still have an estimated 60 nuclear warheads. So the whole goal of denuclearization that President Trump was hoping to achieve when he opened the door for diplomacy with North Korea during the Korean detente back in 2018, 2019, that's all gone now. And Kim has basically used the legitimacy that Trump gave him by meeting with him first in Singapore, then Hanoi, and then at the demilitarized zone. And then he made a hard pivot to Russia and Vladimir Putin after the Ukraine war and has basically positioned himself as a vital ally and supplier of weapons and troops and non-military civilian labor for Russia. And it's a mutually beneficial, highly transactional relationship. But really, with all of the chaos around the world, Kim Jong-un and North Korea has positioned itself as one of the main beneficiaries of that.
And has it been a big opportunity? Because let's think back. North Korea had food shortages not that long ago. It suffered from famines, right? It's been almost the butt of jokes, but right now it seems a lot stronger than I can ever remember.
I mean, I remember just during the pandemic when Kim Jong-un, and this was something astonishing for me, he gave a national address where he was shedding tears and apologizing to the nation because he said he hasn't done enough to improve the quality of lives of the people. And now this is a stunning reversal.
Yeah, you have reports from Pyongyang, people who have been there post-COVID, of luxury retail that is popping up. There are more private car owners than we've ever seen. They're opening pet shops and gourmet restaurants with sushi and Italian and any sort of international food you can imagine. If you have money in North Korea, if you're a member of the North Korean elite and you're bringing in cash through a business, through trade, or whatever way that you're earning that income, you can go and get a $9 latte in Pyongyang. Obviously, a very different situation when you get outside the capital, and there are still a huge, many millions of North Koreans that are food insecure, living in much more remote agricultural, rural areas where life day in and day out is still a struggle. But for the North Korean elite, who are really crucial to Kim keeping his lock on power, their living standards are going up and prices have been going up. The North Korean economy has been growing, and that is in large part due to this relationship with Russia. Even though by far the biggest trading partner is China when it comes to official trade, there's a lot of black market under the table trade going on with Russia, not to mention the potential benefits of secretive military technology and other things that we're never going to know about. We can never really verify, but is believed by some to be happening because of this deepening military alliance between Russia and North Korea, and these meetings between Putin and Kim.
And we heard from Victoria about how invaluable it is to get real world combat training for your military, which is what the North Korean military is getting to some degree. But I have a different question. President Trump went to war against Iran, ostensibly, as he declared it, against its nuclear program. What is the state of Kim Jong-un's nuclear arsenal right now?
He's believed to have 60, perhaps, nuclear warheads, and perhaps the enriched uranium to produce up to 90 warheads. They haven't been testing long-range ballistic missiles like they were a few years back, but they're believed to be mass-producing missiles, and they're getting real-time battle experience. They're being able to test the accuracy of these missiles on the front. Russia, Ukraine, they were fighting in the Kursk region, and as you heard Victoria mention, some of the missiles were missing their targets by as much as 15 kilometers, which is quite terrifying because their entire families were killed by this missile, landing on someone's house when there's no target anywhere near that area. But apparently, the belief is, according to Ukrainian intelligence, that the missiles are getting more accurate. Now, this could also be Ukraine trying to signal to South Korea that they're looking for missile defense support. There are restrictions in South Korea to sell missile defense directly to Ukraine. Obviously, the Ukrainian president would like to get more international assistance. So we don't know how much of this messaging is an attempt.
Clearly, Volodymyr Zelensky wants Asian powers to support his...
South Korea is one of the world's largest weapons manufacturers.
And they're not, I don't believe they're directly selling or supplying the Ukrainian military.
Right.
So there's an imbalance there when it comes to the Korean Peninsula. I mean, look, Kim Jong-un's nuclear arsenal, he's not hiding it either. In June, he's quoted saying that a goal is to, quote, steadily expand and strengthen the nuclear forces, and arguing that he needs this as an insurance policy in a dangerous world.
And he spoke earlier this year on state media, basically alluding to the fact that the Iran war totally justified his decision to keep the nuclear weapons. So really, anybody who's an observer of the Korean Peninsula knows that denuclearization has been off the table for a while. And if President Trump were willing to say that, then maybe the North Koreans would be willing to have a conversation at the top leader level with the United States. But remember, when President Trump left the meeting in Hanoi with the lunch table, all the food was uneaten, the table was set, but Trump rushed to get back on the plane to get back to Washington. That loss of face is something that Kim Jong-un will never forget. And there have been huge internal turmoil in the aftermath of that, changes. People were punished. Sources of mine in the country said that they actually witnessed executions in public. That's something that does happen sometimes in North Korea, where people are executed by firing squad, and everybody that works with them in their community has to watch this sort of thing. That's not made up. That actually does happen, and things have changed. And I would be very surprised if Kim Jong-un credibly is really willing to put too much faith in negotiating with the United States after the egg that he had on his face the first time around. But that said, he doesn't know how what's going to happen in Ukraine. The Iran situation may have Kim and his top advisors thinking that maybe it's worth having some sort of a cordial
But,
relationship
but
with the
does
United
North
States.
Korea need the U.S. the way it did when President Trump was meeting with Kim Jong Un?
Well, especially
nearly
now
a
that
decade
he's-
ago. I will never forget the image. I was in Beijing when it was the 80th
Last
anniversary
year.
of the victory over in World War II.
Yeah.
That image of Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, walking down the red carpet in Beijing, flanked by Kim Jong Un on one side, Vladimir Putin on the other. It was such a show of force, basically. A screw you to the Western world. Like, we are united. We're a team now.
And Kim Jong Un brought his daughter to Beijing. She's believed to be a teenager, believed to be named Kim Jue. We don't actually know because they've
Believed
never.
to be a likely successor.
Well, that's the rumor, that she's being put front and center in North Korean state media as his likely successor. We just saw her over the weekend as President Trump was posting pictures with Kim Jong-un. Kim was seen with his daughter at various celebratory events around Pyongyang, including at a circus, including attending a memorial unveiling. She's with him all the time. Also interesting that Kim, just in the last few months, has opened up a giant, lavish museum in Pyongyang honoring his soldiers who were killed. They've built this entire propaganda narrative around the believed to be maybe a couple of thousand North Korean soldiers at least, maybe more depending on who's doing the estimates. And that memorial complex has space for many more graves. So clearly, Kim Jong-un may be preparing to double down on this relationship with Russia and even using the deaths of his soldiers to create a propaganda narrative that it's North Korea against an enemy, against the West, against the world. And that's the narrative that the North Korean government has used to really hold their grip on power now for nearly 80 years.
Well, I mean, I think it's too big. It's too big to ignore the losses that North Korea has, faced in the Ukraine war. I mean, you talked about the close relationship with Russia and with China. I guess again, this goes back
the
to
Russians have been celebrating this. They've paraded North Korean troops in Red Square in Moscow. I mean, this is something that both governments are embracing wholeheartedly.
For sure, but I think that again that comes back to the question, right? Like, why is North Korea more dangerous? It's because now they have these two strong allies in China and Russia.
Who sometimes kind of held their noses and stayed back from North Korea in the past.
Look, you touched on a really important point earlier, the optics of Kim Jong-un standing shoulder to shoulder with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. The reason why that's happening now is because President Trump opened the door for diplomacy. And as soon as President Trump wanted to meet with Kim Jong-un, then all of a sudden all these other world leaders were interested in meeting with Kim Jong-un as well. And now he's seen at that level, the level of a world leader, when in the past, his father, Kim Jong-il, his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, they were almost a sideshow. They weren't given that level of respect and deference. That's something that they always wanted. Kim Jong-un has actually achieved it, and he got a lot of help in doing that because the door was opened by President Trump.
A thought I think when we're discussing North Korea and the U.S., I think we should also just touch upon South Korea, right? I mean, they've had the wrong end of the stick with President Donald Trump, I mean, because of punishing tariffs, and now President Trump constantly talks about how South Korea is not enough militarily
That
to
they're
support the U.S.
mooching-
troops that are based
mooching
there.
off the Americans.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of that? Like, what can the South Koreans do now?
Look, I think President Yi in South Korea would actually love it if President Trump were to resume diplomacy with Kim Jong-un and make some headway in diffusing tensions on the Korean Peninsula. That's something that he asked President Trump to do fairly recently. He asked him to be the leader, to be the peacemaker, and he said he would be the pacemaker to keep the talks pumping along, keep them alive. So I think that South Korea does understand the situation that they're in, and they're going to try to work with the United States as best they can, despite the curveballs that could be thrown their way. I think every world leader knows that when they're dealing with the United States, and especially with President Trump, they need to expect the unexpected, and they just try to navigate it as best they can.
Yeah, exactly. And now, after all of these, I know the sanctions have worked in the past, when the U.S. has some sanctions in 2017, but now, does U.S. have any leverage against North Korea?
The U.S. has a lot less leverage than it did the first time around, the first round of diplomacy. Because
2017.
2017 was at the height of the
meetings.
tensions, the fire and fury era. Then 2018, 2019, starting with the Pyeongchang Olympics, things really slowed down. And at that point, Kim really was trying to see if he could break new ground with the United States, if they could build a relationship of trust. But when the Hanoi summit ended and there was no deal and there was no progress made, that sort of closed the door on diplomacy with the United States for the time being, even if they publicly still make friendly overtures. And they did end up meeting at the demilitarized zone later that year in April 2019. So the United States, they can't come to the table now and say denuclearization or nothing. And the North Koreans would say, we've written it in our constitution, we're going to have our nuclear weapons. Look at what you've done to countries that don't have nuclear weapons. We're never going to allow that to happen.
It's incredible. The most isolated country in the world now has kind of resumed positive, good, friendly relations with China, its longtime friend. It now has a mutual defense treaty with Russia, which presumably North Korea is making now potentially billions of dollars a year off of contributing to Russia's ongoing war with Ukraine. Does Kim Jong-un need anything from the U.S. right now?
Also, Russia has veto power at the United Nations, so it can protect them from additional sanctions.
There you go.
As well as China.
It is a tremendous reversal, and it comes back to that argument or that question: is North Korea more dangerous than ever before? And it certainly looks more confident, I think, than we've seen it in quite some time.
From the perspective of the West, you could look at North Korea and say there's really nothing stopping them from continuing to grow militarily and also to grow economically. And they can use that nuclear arsenal as a really big bargaining chip to get them a position on the world stage with other nuclear powers, which has always been the goal of all three Kim rulers in North Korea, and particularly now Kim Jong-un, who's doubled down on that.
I think the one question I have is, like, I know North Korea is making a lot of money out of this Ukraine war, but once that war ends, then what happens to North Korea?
That could be a potential opportunity for the United States at that point, depending on the tone that they take trying to go into conversations with North Korea. Because Kim does know this current situation isn't going to last forever, and it is very transactional. These are fair weather friends. Things can change, and Kim could be looking at ways to figure out how he's going to maneuver his country to get the best position for North Korea post-Ukraine, post-Iran.
It's a really complicated geopolitical web. But I think most important, we have to remember there are people like our friend and colleague Victoria and her 14-year-old son who are living in a city getting pounded by drones and ballistic missiles day and night. People are dying while these governments are kind of playing their geopolitical chess game right now. But Will, thanks so much for coming in and sharing your expertise on this. And it's something we're going to be watching very closely because something is changing right now. We're watching that change in real time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Will.
And thank you for watching another episode of Meanwhile in Asia. Please keep following us, subscribe, and we'll have another episode for you next week.
See you then.